Hello, today is Monday, the 12th of April, year 2021. My name is Cassandra Youngblood, and I'm interviewing Kristy Arvizu for the South Texas Archives at Texas A&M University, Kingsville. This is in part of the Voices of a Pandemic Oral History Project in partnership with the Voices Oral History Center at the University of Texas at Austin. Please know, Miss Kristy, that this is a recorded interview that will be placed in the South Texas Archives at Texas A&M Kingsville and shared with the Voices Oral History Center at the University of Texas at Austin. If there is anything you do not wish to answer or talk about, especially given that your recording may appear online, I will honor your wishes. Also, if there is something you want to talk about, please bring it up and we'll talk about it. Because we are not conducting this interview in person, I need to record your consenting. So I'll ask you a series of 6 questions. Please say yes, I agree, or no, I do not agree after each one. There are 4 questions we need to make sure you agree to before we can go on. South Texas Archives at Texas A&M University, Kingsville wishes to archive your interview, along with any other photographs or any documentation at the South Texas Archives at Texas A&M University, Kingsville. We will retain copyright of the interview and any other materials you donate to the South Texas Archives at Texas A&M University, Kingsville. Okay, the first question is, do you give us consent to archiving your interview and your materials at the Jerrigan Library at Texas A&M University, Kingsville?
Yes, I agree.
Do you grant South Texas Archives at the Jerrigan Library at Texas A&M University, Kingsville copyright over the interview and any material you'll provide?
Yes, I agree.
Do you agree to allow South Texas Archives at the Jerrigan Library at Texas A&M University, Kingsville to post this interview on the internet where it may be viewed by people around the world?
Yes, I agree.
Do you grant South Texas Archives at Jerrigan Library at Texas A&M University, Kingsville consent to share your interview and your materials with the Voices Oral History Center at the University of Texas at Austin for inclusion in the Voices of a Pandemic Oral History Project, which will include posting the interview on the internet?
Yes, I agree.
We have many questions in a pre-interview form that we have already filled out. We use that information from the pre-interview form to help in research. The entire form is kept in a secure Voices server at the University of Texas at Austin. The final storing of the pre-interview form will be at the South Texas Archives at the Jerrigan Library at Texas A&M Kingsville. We will have stripped out any contact information for yourself or family members, so that will not be a part of your public file. Your public file will only be accessible to the Jerrigan Library. Do you wish for us to share the rest of your interview in the public file available to researchers at the South Texas Archives at the Jerrigan Library at Texas A&M University, Kingsville?
Yes, I agree.
On occasion, Voices receives requests from journalists who wish to contact our interview subjects. We only deal with legitimate news outlets. Do you give consent for us to share your phone numbers or your email with journalists?
Yes, I agree.
Tell me a little bit about your experience with COVID-19.
Just like within the whole gist of it?
Yes, within the whole, about a year, the whole year.
Okay. Well, pretty much it just started off what we came into knowledge about it come 2019, late 2019, then throughout the full 2020 year having to deal with it. And I mean, I was in a time where I was in a place to where I was going to be starting on a lot of new things, graduating, moving into a new city, kind of just starting a new place. And in a sense, COVID kind of felt like a stopping point. Like I had to continue, obviously, but at the same time, like how can the world continue with this going on? And it kind of put everything at a standstill, especially with the quarantine. Like you couldn't go anywhere. So it was, well, where can I go if I need to go places? So kind of just real 360 of everything with COVID, like total 360.
how did you first learn about COVID-19?
I would have to say, being that I was already towards the end of my college career, I was in student teaching. And so I was having lunch casually with my mentor that I was with. And he kind of just mentioned, like, hey, like, there's this thing that's going on um, overseas. And we're like, oh, okay, like something's just going on overseas. That's all it really was. So it wasn't necessarily any like kind of panic just yet, or so to speak, panic. And then from then on, just kind of just watching it and, hey, do you hear about this thing? Did you hear about? And that's all it was. It was just, did you hear about this? And they're closing off borders there. And it was all mainly just from like news outlets and like other people, like Facebook. People were talking about it. And it wasn't until the first case in Texas where it was like, okay, this is getting closer to home. So yeah, it was a social media kind of word of mouth. People were telling me, and through news outlets is where I got all the information from it.
So what was your first initial reaction to it? Like when you first realized that, oh, this is really going on here in Texas.
Well, just being that it was, I think it was up near the Houston areas where like the first one came in, or like near Dallas or something. And so just having family there, that was the first concern. It's like, okay, I have family there. Well, what about if these people travel, or we have people that come here back and forth, or things like that? Never that I traveled in that direction, but just in the sense of, first it was overseas. Then all of a sudden it was in the US, spreading very rapidly, very quickly, to where certain places were quarantining already. It's just like, okay, well, Texas is huge. What's going to happen to us when the first one comes in? And when the first one came in, that's when it kind of set of, at the very first initial reaction was, am I going to get this thing? And knowing people have died from it, and I'm going to die from it. Like that was initial reaction. Or am I going to have people that do? And it was kind of just, we didn't know. It was the older, it was the elderly. And so it was just not so much like panic per se, but just so many questions with very little answers.
So when you first heard about it, did you ever realize that it was the entire time you were very serious about it, or were there at the beginning or at any certain point of the time did you not think it was serious at all?
No, I took it very serious because, I mean, now you're seeing a lot of different people of, oh, it's just a hoax. And it was never that case that I took it as that hoax. I thought it was very, very true. How it was, whether made, how kept saying that it was, that didn't matter. It was just the sense of, there was something here, there was something that was causing it, there was something that people were causing to get sick. Some people unfortunately died. And therefore, this was something that had to be taken serious, regardless of, and it was to the point to where, I mean, you had people doing the stockpiling of toilet paper, Clorox wipes, clean up, like everything. And I didn't go to that extent of the panic, but just in the idea of these things that I took, like, oh, I can get that at the next trip, now being seen as like the holy grail of things that you needed to get, because this was something that ended up being serious. Were we going to lock down for the whole year? Were we going to lock down for a few months? What was it going to be? Like I said from the previous time, is it was a lot of answers with very little, with a lot of questions with very little answers.
So I know you mentioned earlier that when COVID was first getting known, even overseas and not really within the U.S. yet, you were in your last semester of college. So how has COVID impacted you from that your very last semester to now?
Well, that particular experience, and it has come up quite a bit, being that I was the first year or the first semester for Kingsville to have this type of thing that happened. That all of a sudden school had to stop functioning, on campus things, little to no contact with people. And so it took us to being like a world of being known for technology to actually living off the technology part. So being that I was student teaching, obviously you have to teach in front of people face to face. It ended up being to the point that I was teaching through a computer screen. And that just in itself felt very awkward. From on top of that, to being told there's a chance that you can have your graduation ceremony, to then all of a sudden something that you had been working for maybe 4, 5, some very fortunate 3 years, to then all of a sudden be, well, I'm sorry, we can't do this because of the stage that we're at. And so from that point, being that I never had the final hurrahs or the walking of the stage, or even just this was the last final that I took, having those realizations of this was it, this is the finish line, still being where I am today, as of today, I don't feel like I officially closed that chapter in life. It still feels very much open because it wasn't ever closed. You have many students in my shoes as well. I know I'm not the only one, to where you're trying to, okay, I have to move on with my life, but there's still this aspect of I haven't closed it, but I know I need to move on. And so therefore it still feels very much open, and it changed a lot of things. To all of a sudden you're having to be kicked out into society of, hey, this is where you're at now, deal with it, you got to find it. And especially being a teacher in a time to where everyone felt that everyone does feel that the teachers are essential to make sure that students are still learning. As a student of the 4 years that I was there, I was never taught to, you're going to be teaching from a computer screen at home. You're going to be teaching with face masks over your face, with kids with face shields, with kids that are boxed in. Your kids are going to be separated. You're taught to be enduring, loving to the kids, face to face, hugging, being close to them, that these kids can interact with each other. When it became very, very much not so, just here's a screen and this is what we can do. And so for a lot of that, it just came unknowing, just not knowing when it would end or what would happen. And that's where kind of just life kind of stayed, is okay, well, what's next in this? Of, once again, going back to so many questions, so very little answers.
So you mentioned during your student teaching and even to now, some of the challenges that as a teachers have faced. What are Do you know of any other challenges, or has anybody spoke up about the your challenges in terms of your students that face while having to transition to an online model of education?
Oh, most definitely. I mean, as a teacher and as certain degrees will teach you, some kids are needing to have that face to face. And that's challenging because we're now at with certain age groups to where all they have is their phone, their tablet, and they're able to go. Like I have students that are able to just at a very young age navigate, oh, this is how you go through YouTube, or this is how you go through this. At that age, I wasn't thinking of that. And so for them, it became second nature. But at the same time, we have certain students with learning disabilities that cannot be seated at a table or at a desk in front of a video cam, just as we're doing, and still be doing work. They're more concerned of, what was that flash that went on behind me? Or, oh, well, who's on the other screens that we're trying to find? So there's a lot of challenges, not only for the students, but as well as the teachers, of bring back the attention to me versus what you would have in a classroom. You have that as your home. That's your safe haven for the kids, for you, versus these kids that are having to, okay, well, bed's right there. Let me go just 2 or 3 steps next to my bed at the desk, and there's my teacher. Versus getting up in the morning, brushing your teeth, having breakfast, going to have that routine that they would normally have, to now not having that at all, to where some students I even heard have said, luckily I've been teaching face to face now, but to where previous with student teaching, they felt from that point of when we began the quarantine, which was mid-March of 2020, to about when the school year ended, May or June, they felt that they learned nothing. There was nothing that they felt. They felt that as if they were just talking to people over a video camera, and that was it. There was nothing of importance. There was nothing that they felt. Or I could easily, I've seen hacks all over the place to where it's just like, I can make sure this is a picture. I can have a pre recording of me as a student, just, and that's all it is, versus I'm over here playing my video games in the other room. So it's very different, very challenging, not only for the student, but for the teacher, because now you're having to work double. And I've seen teachers that have felt that where they're doing what we call hybrid teaching is you're going from face to face with a group of kids that need to have that face to face interaction with kids that can be taught at home through Zoom or any other different outlet, Google Classroom, and they're able to do that. But now you're having to split your mind into two different places for this particular students, for these particular students, and then on top of that, to have certain specificities of certain kids. Of this particular kid needs to be with this particular learning disability having an IEP to where they have to be taught a certain way, and you have to do that. But then at the same time, you're focused on this kid, double the work with it's the reality of with very little pay to be doing so much with not feeling the gratification of it of this is what you're doing, and that's not the case for teachers. We joined this particular field for a reason because we love to teach, we love to be with students, we love to see that aha moments of, oh, that's what it is. We love those moments, but at the same time it can be very crucial for kids to where they felt I didn't learn anything for a year, and they lost that. And now the next teacher that may get them that, oh, now that we have vaccines and everything, we can come face to face. Well, what did you guys learn last year? Who knows? And that does not go on the teacher. It's just the circumstance that you're now in is of, do you feel that you did fully put a full effort? And some teachers are leaving absolutely drained of, how can I give it my all when I just feel like there's so much that I have given and there's very little that I can do anymore. And it's that feeling, it's that challenge to be, okay, I got to get up, I got to go do this, I got to go do that. And at the point, I'm going to be exhausted at the end of the day. But for these kids, I have to do something because this is the future. This is the future of our society, and you have to continue.
So, in reference to the school that you're teaching at now, and as well as the previous schools that you student teach at, were there
Mhm.
any? Have you seen any accommodations that the schools have made, or any differences between the two schools that have been able to accommodate to the teachers as well as to the students' needs through COVID?
Yes, for the most part, of safety protocols were placed for most of the time. So, first, going off in chronological order, it would be for student teaching. First, we had to where no students were on campus ever allowed, to then having to be sent packets home. And that was their way of being taught. And to then for the teachers of, if only by means necessary, if you're needing to come onto the campus, come onto the campus. But if you're not needed to, please work from home due to the safety of everybody else, sanitizing different places. And this was very much when COVID was new. As we went about the year, now going to where I currently work, it was placed that we had COVID guidelines and protocols, and it needed to be assigned as a waiver that prior to you registering for this particular school year, you knew of these. So that would be your student is required to wear a mask throughout the school day if within less than 6 feet of an individual. Students will be socially distanced to use the restroom. For example, you had pre COVID abundance of students in potentially one or two grade levels having lunch all together. versus now being told you have to have lunch in your classroom. Teachers don't get a lunch break, and that's how it has to be. And you're still socially distanced, but that's where you have to have your lunch now. Versus, oh, we can go outside for recess and use all the playground equipment. To them being told, no, you can't touch the playground equipment at all until we sanitize, or if we can sanitize. And by all means, do we have it in our budget to be able to get one of those sanitizing devices? So a lot of things ended up changing to where, for the students, good and bad, to where they felt that there's a social development for kids. And they need to have that interaction to where they feel that they can't have that because of this virus. They're not able to, yes, I can talk to you, but I'm not with you, nor do I find out how am I supposed to learn how to share with an individual? How am I supposed to respect an individual versus I'm not supposed to interrupt them when a teacher can very easily, of a click of a mouse, say, I'm sorry, I'm going to mute you because you're interrupting a friend. And that's not the case in real life. A student has to learn that development of, okay, I need to be able to stop what I'm thinking, raise my hand, and wait patiently. So for those cases, it's hard for the kid because you're having to have that challenge, but at the same time, you have to keep in mind the safetyness of the kid. And then for the teacher, you've had, oh, well, let's go on to this class, or let me have a conference, let me have a break. For, I mean, there's a typical standard of if you work certain amount of hours, you're required to have a break. Sometimes it feels as if teachers don't get that because that break is used for something else. And then we're always told to make sure you self-care. Whenever you may keep in mind self-care, but whether that be the weekend, you're grading papers, you're doing something, or it's simply just, if you are doing through Zoom, some teachers have given out personal phone numbers to say, hey, if you need something to help out, feel free to text me, feel free to call me. And you have students at 3 a.m, why is my assignment still 0? I'm asleep. I'm not worried about that. That's not me per se, but these are examples that I've seen from other teachers, is that there's no longer a shift or a difference between work and home. Now you're having to have that challenge of to where the two are blending together with some accommodation of safety or where you're supposed to have that, but you end up getting the short end of the stick on it in some instances.
So I'm going back to the time in between after you graduating and getting your job,
Mhm.
your current job now. How did COVID in any way impact your work, as in like trying work related challenges such as like finding a job, um, trying to match pay with something, like trying to receive the pay that you want to find or you wanted to have or expected to have, or any challenges in between that?
Mhm. Well, during the time being that it always has been for teachers to be a necessity. We need to have more teachers. We need to have more teachers. And you have some teachers that can stay in a job for 30 plus years, and they're in that same job, they're teaching that same subject, maybe within that same school. So you run into that. But when it came to not just now being face to face or going to school, now having to the potential of being told in an interview process versus how would you act with if this child in your classroom. No, it was rephrased to how would you act if this child, particularly over your Zoom call, would be acting this way? How would you go about into contacting the parent, or however they phrased it? So being just within the interview process was already changed. How you have discipline problems handled through Zoom, um, versus what are your behavior challenge or behavioral rules or your discipline that you would input within your classroom. So interview already was just very difficult and very changed of I wasn't taught this in college, so therefore I don't know this answer. And if I did end up seeing this in an interaction, it was very short lived from March to May. And that didn't look very good on some cases that you did see from some teachers that it was a new thing for everyone that we didn't know what to do or okay this now new thing that we're going to have to use Zoom is now our go-to and something we were never taught for Google Classroom is now your outlet to get to your students and that was difficult in itself. Then on top of that being going back to there's sometimes teachers that stay there 30 plus years. Some teachers for my instance I'm physical education. There was not a demand for physical education teachers because I was as a teacher, I would just be through Zoom. Physical education has the word in itself, physical, movement, hands-on. You can't do any of that with COVID. And so for that point, it was, we're not looking for that particular position, but can you get this additional certification? Now that's having to add on to something that I couldn't necessarily do because things were closed. I can't go get that book. I can't go get that test because we can't. We're in quarantine. This is something that I wasn't taught. I was told that there's this potential that I may get this, but of course I should have a backup plan. And I would say that would be on me, is to have this backup plan to where you can do this additional as well. Even though not physical education, but just coaching athletics. There's that big if of, is there going to be athletics? And that was something else I went to school for. So being told that a thing I went to school for 4 years, I'm now coming out of that and now going and trying to get into the work field. Oh, we don't have any of that. It was a big drop in self-esteem. Very much so to where I felt that I was in a dark, dark place of I just spent 4 years, so much of blood, sweat, and tears to them being told, we have nothing for you on the other side because of this. And so in a point it was this aggression of I want this to be done. But at the same time is okay, well then what do I have to do to make sure I have something? And it was just very difficult to where now in my position, I'm trying my best to make what I can of the position that I'm in because I was not taught the position I am currently in. It's learning day by day, it's learning over the weekend. What can I do for these kids to make sure that they're learning? Because this is not my specialty. Will I try my best to make sure that you're getting all that you can get? Most definitely. But I am not an in classroom teacher or from what I was taught. If you told me March 2020, you're going to be teaching this particular grade level in a classroom, I would have laughed and said, no, I'm teaching physical education in a gym, or I'm teaching health, and I'm going to be coaching this particular athletics. That was my goal. And to be told that that goal was not necessarily achievable due to this virus hurt. Very big blow, very big of not being able to going back to the interview. You didn't go to a face-to-face interview. This is my portfolio. This is what I can do. This is how you can see me as an individual. It was just as we're doing now. Whatever goes on in the background is whatever goes on in the background, but focus on me. And I could be doing whatever it may be, or you can. And so it was very much different to having to now pause your life, go onto a video chat with so many people waiting in the lobby to potentially have that go for that same job as yours, but you're not getting that human interaction with me of how I am and how I can be as a potential employer with you. And so it was just challenging all in itself to one, the interview process, second, being told that the job that you were looking for is no longer here or not here currently was very under like very low blow to self-esteem and just feeling of what now? What can I do to make something work for me? And lo and behold, there was something that could be found for me that someone did find for me, luckily, and said, okay, we can give you this teaching position. You're just going to have to work. And I have been since April of 2020, working and doing the best that I can. And do I still feel this sense of my fullness is not there? Yes, because there's a part that my heart still belongs somewhere else. And it's what I went to school for 4 years. So therefore, I don't feel this happiness there, but I am still doing what I need to do to get the job done.
Are you comfortable talking about your finances? Not specifics, but general finances during COVID?
Yes, that's perfectly fine.
Okay, so how has COVID impacted your ability financially to contribute to your family? I know you're recently engaged and you're just out of school, so anything doing with education or student loans, or are you planning on going back to school? Um, Anything around that financial area?
Mhm. Well, kind of just to start from the beginning, I was working on campus for about 2 to 3 years. And with student teaching, being that I had to be at the school from this period of time to this period of time would not allow me to work during the day. And that's really only when I was accessible and would not feel uh, drained or overdone if I had something later in the evening, because it could have been done. It could have been done to where I did something at a later shift or a late night shift. But to then be having to have such an early morning, my body would have not endured the abuse of that. And so I very early on in January resigned from my job. And so then when March came around to where, well, now they're not looking for jobs because no one needs jobs unless they are already having them. Um, a large amount that used to be there was slowly depleting and depleting by the minute, depleting by the hour. It didn't help that we were in quarantine, and therefore the main button sometimes that I did see was, oh, buy it now. And that's all you could do. And that's something that I fell onto myself. But to then at one point having such of a saving grace of, well, to get you through these tough times, we're going to give you this grant. So they did. But that grant had to be used for rent, had to be used for groceries, had to be as it should be, or it should be either put back to your school. But I couldn't just let it be there. It had to be used within an instant. It was by a stroke of luck that that grant was given, lo and behold, because otherwise that would have put me into a very bad and negative situation. Since I was not currently working at the time, luckily my boyfriend at the time, now my fiance, was. So he was having to deal with a lot of the financial responsibility. And therefore, that took a toll on himself. I mean, to being, are we going to get these groceries for the week? And well, we have to order curbside so many days in advance to make sure that we get it. And is this going to be in stock because the trucks haven't come through, or it's there's a limited amount and therefore first come first serve. So it was a lot of, is there going to be enough? Will we be okay? And it became very unknowing for quite a bit of time. And it wasn't until mid, I want to say mid May, that we felt comfortable enough to where we can make things work so we can move. And so we moved in mid late June to where we live now. And I still at that point, not knowing, kind of not necessarily scraping through, but not feeling that comfortable if something of emergency were to happen, we would be okay. It would be if an emergency happened, we're in an emergency. And that's where it came to being just what's going to happen. And yes, you're still working. Yes, you're still getting a paycheck, but it was living paycheck by paycheck to where some things, no, we can't get that. And we really can. We really shouldn't, when it was kind of not necessary, but needed to make sure, but we couldn't. And so it didn't come to the point to where we were by all means rich in so many expenses, but as a self, as to where I can feel that sometimes I'm independent, I didn't have that. And to having to be dependable upon someone was, again, a big blow to the self-esteem, and to being told of the stimulus checks at that particular time of period, we were not eligible. So it was kind of, if anything, we're the people that need it, but we couldn't get it because we weren't
How are you
in.
not? I'm sorry. How are you not eligible for the stimulus check? If that's okay to ask.
Mhm. Within the first part, if I'm not mistaken, it was you had to be a dependent of, which I was. So it's great. I had to be within a certain age. Therefore, I was not of the age. So therefore, I did not qualify, nor did my mother qualify for to get that additional charge that would be given to her, which we had agreed that she would give to me. But it was not done. It could not be done. So therefore, that was just money that was left. Luckily, not till this year when they said that you could have it as a tax credit, we were now given it. Luckily, we've been able to put that to a more positive way, but at the same time, to have that in the most crucial time would have made a big difference. And I know for some individuals, it did make a big difference. At that point, um, being that I was unemployed, I could have filed for unemployment, but many people were filing for unemployment, and I just ended up getting lost in that part. And so unemployment wasn't an option for, in my eyes. And so for being that, just of not having those accessible needs as particular some people that I feel, in a sense, and that they truly did need it, but in a sense I also need it as well. You felt, where do I go? I can't do anything. How do I make certain like how do I make amends of certain things? Or to the point where I sold things online and I would ship them out if I could, and having to sell personal goods, or even having to work when later on I moved to now the new city that I live in, having to do DoorDash to make ends meet of, okay, I'll get this easy cash that I can. People are not leaving their homes due to um, COVID, and they're needing things to be dropped off. I'll go ahead and put myself at risk, so to speak, to bring you that. But of course, I need money. I need to be able financially to support myself and the others around me. So, yes and no for the financial part, but at the same, most of the time, it was very unknowing of what would be next. Will we be okay? If something did happen, could we fix that? And it was, who knows?
Okay, I'm gonna switch to more of a social approach or dynamic questions. Um, how, if at all, have the current social movements in conjunction of COVID impacted your daily life? So, social gatherings, going out. I know you talked up a little bit about that, about putting your health at risk. Doing the DoorDash, even with students, being a teacher as well, an educator. Um, but is there anything that was has restricted you from going out or enjoying a more social setting or for personal um, enjoyment, gratification?
Mhm. Um, Being early on, it was very difficult to picture yourself going out. In my mind, yes, I wanted to go. I wanted to go to this restaurant. I didn't want to be just confined to the four walls that were in my apartment, and I didn't want that. But later on, it was more of the sense of hearing over the news. This particular gathering is going on, and it was a like a spreader. And so having that shock of, if I go home, being that I have family back at home, I'm so many miles away from them, I have to consider, did I expose myself? And if I go to see them, do I put them in harm's way? Being that many of these things, many of looking at COVID cases that were coming in for the counties, it was being quoted travel related. I didn't want to be another statistic, being that going back home, my family gets COVID. And therefore, how did they get it? It was travel related. That was very difficult to bear, being that I went from seeing my family maybe once a month, maybe even 3 times a month, to not seeing them for some members for half a year, maybe even more. Some I still haven't seen to this day face to face. So it was very difficult, not only not just to think of myself, but to think of them. For example, this past weekend, it was Easter, the weekend previous, and we had a case in my home, in not in my home, but back at home with a family member. And it was to the point that, we're already in town. We're sorry, but you can't come. What do you mean I can't come? Well, for the safety of us, for the safety of everyone else, please consider that you've been potentially exposed, if not already have it, and you can give it to us. And it was not ugly in a sense, but more of, if they show up, we are leaving for our safety, because that's what it was safety. And this is family. This is people that you want to hug at any given second, be with all as much as you can, and to be of, no, get away, like, for your safety, my safety, more my safety. And even to the point to where certain, when guidelines were loosened, it was being to, eating at a restaurant was not done for me. Maybe once COVID was exposed in March 2020, there officially as our quarantine, not till maybe September, October. So several months go by that we will get pickup and pickup only. We will do curbside and curbside only. We will do to go and to go only, and that's it. So the only thing we're getting exposed to is that bag of food. That was bags of groceries, and that was all. To social interactions with friends, of going back to my graduation, I no longer could have that. To me being recently engaged, and let's throw an engagement party. Yes and no. How about we do it once everything is good? Or Christmas, everyone have a Christmas mask. I mean, we had fun with that, but it was more of, you have to have a mask. Or if we're going to be within each other, the guideline is for us to be outside in 6 feet. But if we're enclosed in an enclosed area, we should all have masks on. And it was difficult to, lo and behold, I have a mask right here in front of me, to be, oh, hey, mom, I love you. And this is all I could do. And it couldn't be, as we do, would be a kiss on the cheek or even hugging. It was very awkward to have a discussion with my dad and say, hey, I love you. And we fist bump, or we elbow bump. And that was the interaction. Or seeing someone and completely forgetting the idea that we're in. I see an old friend of mine back at home. Hey, going in for a hug. Then, as we're having that transition of getting closer, oh, wait, COVID. Okay. And having that interaction, to being like, we were about to hug. Who knows if you had, like, you never know. Does that person in this next room, does that person right next to me, that is this person that would in this was holding the shopping cart, did they have it? And you see now people are wiping down things, sanitizing things, mask, no mask for some people. And it changed a lot. Still to this day, it changes a lot. I mean, now in Texas, you have the, we're open at 100%. I went to a restaurant this past weekend. I had never seen that restaurant so fully opened, that I felt oh, this doesn't feel good. I should feel more relaxed. Like if everything's opened and you're seeing that there's a large amount of people, that's a good sign. Like that restaurant's great. But at the same time, now that's like, oh, there's a lot of people at that restaurant. Maybe we'll go somewhere a little bit that, or we'll just go less like populated, or we'll just, we'll get to go instead. It's now having to think of that transition, or you know what, a lot of more people are coming, let's leave. So it's given me now more of a, even to this day, half vaccinated, so to speak, and always wearing masks, always washing hands. It still has this sense of, mm, I just don't know. Like I can't fully put myself in there to where once I am fully vaccinated, I'm gonna, oh, these masks are gone now and forget washing my hands and all these things. It's not the case. It's now just more of, do I want to go there? Like planning my wedding, I can just imagine that some particular guest to this day, even though it might not, our wedding will not be to the end of the year, will be, I don't know. And we completely understand that because of the time that we're in now. And that's just how some people are be. Some people, if I get it, if I get it, if I don't, I don't, and leave it at that. But at the same time, you have those people that like to be cautious, and cautious is okay.
In relation to healthcare, has there been sorry, has there been any like I know that it's been an impact. You just mentioned the being vaccinated. Luckily now there has been different vaccines being offered. Have you been able to receive it, or have you ever had any difficulty trying to receive it, or trying to access healthcare in general during this past year with COVID?
hmm Well, not per se did I have to have anything healthcare related, but I know from some other people, um, if anything did happen, let's say I had a friend that had to have someone go into the hospital for a surgery. They couldn't be there for the surgery when typically you can wait in the surgical waiting room. We'll let you know when everything happens. It was to where hospitals were such frowned upon. If you didn't have COVID, you should not step foot into there whatsoever. To luckily, I didn't have to do that. And at the same time, even with healthcare, I had one particular doctor appointment that was video chat. How are you feeling? When typically you have the doctor of, okay, I sense a fever, breathe in, breathe out, let's check this and that. And it was just, oh, well, I have a tickle in my throat. Well, I could easily have, no offense, looked that up and, okay, take this particular medicine versus me having this interaction with you. And so that was difficult in itself. It was very awkward, like to be telling someone, oh, I'm feeling this way and this, what can I do? And it was like, oh, well, feel here. And does this feel inflamed? What's inflamed? Or how do I know it's inflamed? Oh, yes, I feel it. So it was very difficult for that. And then at first, the vaccine, I wasn't concerned for myself because I understood the process of it. It was first the essential workers and healthcare professionals. And later on, I went on to the elderly. And so when my time came, I would take that opportunity, no matter anybody saying, well, they haven't had, it was more of a sense of a safety for me, a safety for my family, those around me, being the profession that I'm in. There had been numerous amount of exposures in my workplace. And it was all that was protecting me was a mask. And I have students that would wear a mask that was not wearing it, or had some that were, this is how they talked. And so this was a norm that they couldn't handle being at a young age. And so if I then get told, hey, their grandmother had it, they went over to the grandmother's house, there's a potential within your classroom. There was a point that I had to step back and say, yes, this is my profession, but at the same time, I need to be taking care of myself. Therefore, I'm going to make this decision to get vaccinated. And when the time is that I can, and as my supervisor or my administrator, it I would feel that you would be able to understand that. And they did. And they were very understanding that if there's a substitute that you need or a day that you need to have off, please let us know. We encourage that you get that. We encourage that your safety and go ahead and what is it that you need or how are you feeling today? How are you feeling tomorrow? Let us know. And so it was very good to know to have that support with them as well as family members of saying, oh, you got yours. Okay, well, how did it feel? And then being able to be that advocate of saying, well, you know what? If they got it, let me go ahead and myself, I should get it. If they're trusting it or if they're putting themselves to making sure I stay healthy or like we're all safe, the least I can do that is for them. And so healthcare was very odd and very peculiar during this time to being that some people couldn't see if a family member did have COVID. I never had experienced it myself, and I hope that I don't during this time. Is that you have a family member that's on their deathbed and you can't say goodbye. It has to be through a phone call, it has to be when you should be able to embrace that person of this is goodbye. And I could just imagine the pain and the heart felt of losing someone like that, and to be just for some individuals to be, oh, this is nothing, don't get a vaccination, don't get, it's very much different if going through the experience of COVID, of the full experience and not such a great one, can be very impactful to a person's life.
Well, that seems to answer all of my questions that I had for you today. Um, is there anything else you would like to add or to share with me about your experience with COVID that I have not talked about or that you would like to ask about?
Not in a sense of that I would have to feel it was necessary for research, but more in the sense of just from a personal state of being in that position of I did not have the worst, so to speak, experience through COVID and still currently going through. But for knowing those individuals that did or that felt that COVID messed up everything. And at some points, I did feel that in my life, that COVID did mess up everything. But there was at some points and some highlights that I feel can be seen as positive through COVID. You had families that were potentially being broken apart to having being told you have to stay in quarantine and came together after that, to a marriage that was potentially failing to now be able to say, well, we're with each other and let's work through it. Or in some cases, it went the other way around that I'm with you and who did I marry? So you had those cases, but at the same time, that as individuals, as people, we needed to be there for each other during this time. And it was good to see that most people were. There may have been hiccups here and there during the times, but I feel that as a community, as being seen a society come together, a lot of negative did show a lot more positive in being there for each other, understanding certain rights, understanding that okay, your space is my space, or even to the creativity of a mask. Some people being able to be so creative with how they did things, to businesses having to work from the ground up again. It's joyful. It's a lot of emotion that COVID brought, but at the same time, I don't want to see COVID as a negative or non at a loss of words. I actually just to see negative of COVID, but at the same time, you have to understand that there's some positives, and those positives have to make you happy. even though there's many negatives, and I'm not saying that if someone's family member had passed, that there's still positives in COVID. But at the same time, you have to realize that certain individuals need to realize that in life there is going to be these challenges. And I think us as a society had to endure those challenges and see the differences and understand the differences of everyone to be able to say, I understand. And as us, we need to understand from everyone, anyone's situation. You can't just say, oh, that's nothing. It's more than something to someone, and therefore we need to be respectful of that. And so we'll keep pushing through, and hopefully this is out of the way very soon, but who knows? And that's where we leave off with what I've been saying this whole time, a whole lot of questions with very little answers.
Well, thank you for your time and for this interview. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.